The winter of 1889 came early to the Dakota Territory, sharp and merciless. Snow swept across the mountains in heavy waves, burying trails and freezing rivers, until the land itself felt abandoned by God. The kind of cold that could steal the breath from a man's lungs and his reason with it. Elias Gray stood on a ridge overlooking Deadwood, his weathered coat snapping in the wind, frost gathering in his beard. Below, the town's lights flickered weakly through the curtain of snow. He'd come down from his mountain cabin only because he had to. His supplies were near gone. Powder, medicine, salt. If he didn't make the trip now, he'd be snowed in until spring. Elias had lived alone for 3 years, hiding from a past that refused to die. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and carved from hard living, he looked every inch the man the world once called the Widowmaker. His gray eyes matched his name, cold, steady, and haunted. The Colt 45 at his hip had ended more lives than most men's sins combined, and his Winchester was worn from the grip of familiar violence. The cabin he'd built high in the mountains was little more than logs, mud, and stone, but it was his refuge, a place where no one asked questions, a place where ghosts couldn't find him, or so he told himself on nights when the wind howled like dying men. It was nearly dusk when he reached Deadwood. The snow had turned to sleet, stinging his face as he rode past the outskirts. Then he saw it, an orange glow in the distance, too wild to be lamplight. Smoke rose thick and black over the town's edge. The church was on fire. He slowed his horse, eyes narrowing. The small wooden chapel had stood there for years, a symbol of stubborn faith. Now its cross lay broken in the snow, flames licking through shattered beams. Elias almost kept riding. It wasn't his fight. It hadn't been anyone's fight for a long time, but then he heard voices, harsh, mocking laughter, and beneath them, a woman's cry. He dismounted silently, tying his horse to a fence post, and moved through the shadows. 4 figures emerged through the smoke, 3 men standing over a woman who knelt in the snow. "Ain't so righteous now, are you?" one of the men sneered, his voice thick with whiskey. He kicked snow at her, sending it splattering against the blood staining her dress. "Your husband thought he could preach against Ben Morrison's business. Look where that got him." The woman raised her head. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "My husband spoke the truth about Morrison's murders. You can burn his church, but not what he stood for." "Truth don't matter out here," said another man, lean and mean-looking, hands hovering near his twin pistols. "Only who's got the fastest gun and the fattest wallet." The third man, younger and twitchy, shifted nervously. "Enough talk. Morrison said she ain't supposed to live. Let's finish it." Elias watched from the dark. Every part of him said walk away. He'd given up saving people. Saving people had gotten him hunted. But something in the woman's eyes, defiant, proud, unbroken, stirred something he thought he'd buried with the men he'd killed. He stepped out from the shadows. 3 against 1. He called, voice calm and cold. "That hardly seems sporting." The men spun, startled. "This ain't your business." The bearded one growled. "Ride on while you still can." "Made it my business when I heard you talking," Elias said, brushing his coat aside to reveal his revolver. "Do you know who we work for?" sneered the lean man. "Ben Morrison owns half this territory. You kill us, you'll have 100 men after you by dawn." Elias smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried no warmth. Wouldn't be the first 100. The younger man panicked first. His hand jerked for his gun, but Elias was faster. 1 shot, clean and final. The boy fell, snow turning crimson around him. The lean gunman fired twice, but Elias's bullets found his chest before his aim steadied. He went down hard. The bearded one drew, but too slow. Elias's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him down. He dropped his gun, clutching the wound. You're Elias Gray," he gasped. "The Widowmaker. Thought you were dead." "A lot of people think that," Elias said. "You still can. Ride out. Tell Morrison his business in Deadwood is finished." The man didn't hesitate. He stumbled toward a horse, mounted, and vanished into the storm. Elias holstered his gun and turned to the woman. She was swaying on her feet, one hand pressed to her bleeding side. He caught her before she fell. Her skin was cold as ice, her lips pale. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 30, with dark hair tangled loose and eyes the color of burnt amber. "You're hurt," he said. "I'll manage," she whispered, though her strength failed her as she sagged against him. "My husband." Her gaze drifted toward the burning church. "He's still." "He's gone," Elias said gently. "Nothing you can do for him now." Tears cut tracks through the soot on her face, but she nodded weakly. "I saw them do it." "You have somewhere to go?" he asked. She gave a bitter laugh. "A pastor's widow in Deadwood? No, they tolerated me for Samuel's sake. Now they'll be glad to see me gone." Elias studied her, the firelight flickering across her face. Taking her meant trouble. It meant responsibility. He hadn't carried either in years. But leaving her meant death, and despite what the world said about him, Elias Gray wasn't the kind of man to leave someone to die. "I've got a cabin in the mountains," he said finally. "You can stay till you heal. It's not much, but it's safe." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why help me?" "Don't know you," he said, "but I knew men like them, and I've got no love for Morrison." "I don't even know your name." "Elias Gray?" Her eyes widened slightly, but instead of fear, there was only weary understanding. "Miriam Hartley," she said, "widow of Pastor Samuel Hartley." "Mrs. Hartley," he said, helping her into the saddle. "You're coming with me." The storm swallowed them as they rode into the mountains, two broken souls chasing the faint hope of survival. Snow fell heavier now, covering their tracks almost instantly. By the time Miriam fainted against him, her blood soaking through his coat, Elias knew that saving her might cost him the peace he'd fought so hard to keep. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. The mountain waited, and so did fate. The storm swallowed the world whole that night. The wind screamed through the trees like something alive, clawing at Elias's coat as he pushed his horse through the narrow mountain trail. Miriam hung limp against him, her head lolling weakly on his shoulder. Every few minutes he'd murmur something. Words meant more for himself than for her. "Stay with me. You've come too far to quit now." The blizzard turned time into a blur of white and pain. Ice formed in his beard, his fingers burned from the cold, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. When the dark outline of his cabin finally emerged through the storm, he almost didn't believe it was real. He half fell from the saddle, lifting Miriam in his arms. She was frighteningly light. The snow swallowed his boots as he stumbled to the door, kicking it open with his shoulder. The cabin was cold as a grave. He laid her on his bed, lit the lamp, and fed kindling to the dead fireplace until flames caught. Under the flickering light, he saw how pale she'd become. Blood had soaked through her dress, and the wound in her side looked deep. He found what he had: a bottle of whiskey, a few strips of clean cloth, a needle, and thread meant for mending shirts, not flesh. It would have to do. Elias worked with grim focus. He poured whiskey over the wound, then stitched it closed with a hand that didn't shake, though every pull of the thread brought a soft moan from Miriam's lips. When it was done, he covered her with blankets and sat beside her, staring into the fire. He'd saved lives before, but never like this, not out of kindness. It was always for money, or revenge, or orders. But something about this woman, about her quiet strength even in terror, had reached through his walls, and he hated it. By morning, the storm had sealed them in. Snow pressed against the windows, muting the world to silence. Miriam slept fitfully, her forehead burning with fever. He stayed close, feeding her sips of water, keeping the fire alive. Sometimes she talked in her sleep, whispering a man's name. Samuel. On the second night, the fever peaked. She tossed and murmured, her voice hoarse with delirium. "Samuel, the church. They burned it. They burned you." Elias caught her hand, rough fingers wrapping around her trembling ones. "You're safe now, you hear me? You're safe." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Who are you?" "Elias Gray," he said quietly. "You're in my cabin." Recognition flickered, then tears. "They killed him," she whispered. "They laughed while they did it. And I couldn't stop them." Elias didn't know what to say. Words were useless against that kind of pain. So he just stayed beside her through the long hours of the night, cooling her skin with damp cloths, feeding the fire, and muttering things he hadn't said in years. Small, steady promises to no one in particular. By the fourth morning, the fever broke. When Miriam woke, the light through the window was pale and cold, but steady. She blinked, disoriented, then saw him sitting at the table, mending a torn glove by the fire. "How long?" she croaked. "4 days," he said, not looking up. She touched her bandaged side. "You stitched me up?" Quote, "Had to. You were bleeding bad." She looked down and realized she wore one of his shirts. It hung loose on her, sleeves rolled, collar open. A flush crept up her pale cheeks. He noticed, gave a small nod toward the chair. "Your dress was ruined. Blood don't wash easy." Silence settled, heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, she said softly, "Thank you for saving me, for all this." Elias shrugged. "Don't thank me yet. Storm's not over. We're snowed in till spring, most likely." "I'm intruding on your solitude, aren't I?" He smirked faintly, still mending the glove. "Solitude's overrated." Her smile was small but genuine. "Is that why you live up here? To be alone?" "I live up here because down there, people know my name," he said. "And what comes with it." Her expression shifted, recognition without judgment. "The Widowmaker," she said quietly. "I've heard the name." "Then you know why I keep to myself." "I know stories," she said, her voice gentle. "Not truth." He looked up then, meeting her eyes. Most people flinched when they saw him. Miriam didn't. Her gaze was steady, searching. "Truth's worse than the stories," he said. "Usually," she agreed softly. He almost smiled. "You always this stubborn?" "My husband used to say God gave me an iron spine and a sharper tongue. Said it'd get me in trouble someday." He was right, Elias said, and for the first time in years there was a trace of warmth in his voice. Days passed, each one a rhythm of survival. Elias trapped game, chopped wood, and checked his snares. Miriam, though still weak, insisted on helping, cooking simple meals, mending his clothes, tidying the small cabin. Her presence filled the silence that had once been his comfort. "You should rest," he told her one morning when he found her peeling potatoes by the fire. "I've rested enough," she said, chin lifting. "I won't be a burden." "Didn't say you were." "You didn't have to," she replied, smiling faintly. Elias watched her for a moment, then said, "You tear those stitches. You're sewing them back yourself." That earned a small laugh, the sound light and warm against the winter quiet. When the storm finally ended, the world outside was white and still. Elias stood on the porch, watching the sunlight dance across untouched snow. Miriam joined him, wrapped in a blanket. "They'll come, won't they?" she asked. "Morrison's men?" "Eventually," he said. "But not yet. Not till the trail's open." "And then?" "Then we deal with it." She studied him, her voice quiet but steady. "You didn't have to save me, Elias." "But you did. Why?" He watched the sunlight glint off the snow. Man spends long enough taking lives for gold, he starts wondering what it feels like to save one for nothing. "Is that what I am?" she asked softly. "Your redemption?" He looked at her then, the firelight from the cabin catching in his gray eyes. "You're a woman who needed help," he said. "Nothing more complicated than that." But it was more complicated, and they both knew it. That night, as they sat by the fire, Miriam mending one of his shirts while he cleaned his rifle, the silence between them grew warm, comfortable in a way neither had known in years. When their hands brushed as she passed him a cup of coffee, something in both of them shifted. Elias looked into the fire, jaw tightening. Miriam pretended not to notice. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Soft this time, gentle as forgiveness. And for the first time since he'd buried his past, Elias Gray found himself afraid. Not of death or the ghosts that haunted him, but of what it meant to start wanting something again. The thaw came slow that year, like the land itself was reluctant to let go of its grief. The first trickle of meltwater cut through the snowbanks, and the pine trees shed their icy coats one sigh at a time. Elias stood by the cabin door, sharpening his knife against the whetstone, his movements steady, patient. Behind him, Miriam hummed softly as she swept the floor. The song was low and sorrowful, one of those hymns folks sang at funerals or long winter nights when hope felt far away. It carried through the room like smoke, curling around the air between them. "You sing like someone who believes," Elias said quietly. Miriam paused, glancing up. "And you sound like someone who doesn't." He gave a faint nod. "Haven't found much reason to." "Maybe reason doesn't come first," she said. "Maybe faith does." He looked away, blade glinting in his hands. "I've seen too many men pray before pulling a trigger. Faith don't change what men are." "No," she said softly, "but it can change what they become." Their eyes met across the room, two weary souls bound by something neither fully understood. For weeks now, the silence between them had turned from survival to comfort, and comfort into something deeper. But peace never lasted long for a man like Elias Gray. That afternoon, he spotted the first sign, tracks in the melting snow near the ridge. 3 horses, maybe 4, fresh, the same kind of men who had burned her church and killed her husband. Morrison's riders. He went inside, calm as ever. "We've got company coming," he said. Miriam looked up from the table where she'd been stitching a tear in his coat. "How many?" "Enough." She swallowed. "Then we should run." Elias shook his head. "No time. They'll see the trail. Best we hold ground." "I don't want you to die for me," she said, voice trembling. "I'm not dying for you," he said simply. "I'm living like I should have been a long time ago." He checked his rifle, loaded fresh shells, and handed her his spare revolver. "Can you use it?" Quote. She hesitated, then nodded. "My husband taught me. Said even a preacher's wife should know how to protect what's good." "Smart man," Elias said. By dusk, the riders came, 3 silhouettes against the fading light, snow crunching under hooves. The lead man raised a hand, voice loud and cruel. "Elias Gray! Ben Morrison says you've got something belongs to him." Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "If you mean the widow, she belongs to no one." The men laughed. "Morrison says different. You turn her over, we might let you live." Elias didn't answer. His gray eyes were flat, unreadable. "Last chance, Gray!" The echo of the rifle cracked before the words finished. The lead man toppled backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The others scattered for cover, bullets whistling through the trees. Elias moved like the storm that had nearly killed them both. Silent, fierce, unstoppable. Each shot he fired found its mark. When one rider tried to flank the cabin, Miriam steadied her breath and fired once from the window. The man spun from his saddle and dropped into the snow. Then, silence. Elias stepped out cautiously, scanning the ridge. One man was left, crawling away through the slush, bleeding from the leg. Elias approached, rifle steady. "Tell Morrison," he said coldly. "If he wants her, he'll have to come himself." The man spat blood into the snow. "You can't fight him, Gray. He owns this whole land." "Then maybe it's time someone took it back," Elias said, turning away. When he returned to the cabin, Miriam stood at the doorway, her face pale but calm. "You saved me again." He looked at her for a long moment. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," she said quietly. "You did it because it's right." Elias leaned his rifle against the wall, exhaustion creeping into his bones. He sank into the chair by the fire. "Right's a hard word for a man like me." Miriam knelt beside him. "You keep saying that, but every day since you brought me here, you've proven otherwise." He shook his head. "You don't know the things I've done." "I know enough," she said, "and I know no man carries that kind of sorrow unless he's already paid a price." He looked at her, and for the first time there was something fragile in his eyes. "You think a man like me can be saved?" "I think salvation doesn't wait for permission," she whispered. "It finds those who need it most." For a long moment, neither spoke. The firelight danced over their faces, turning the scars of the past into shadows that no longer held power. Miriam's hand touched his, small, warm, steady. He didn't pull away. Spring melted the last of the snow by the time they buried the dead riders at the foot of the hill. Miriam planted a wooden cross over each grave. Elias said nothing, but when she bowed her head to pray, he removed his hat and joined her. When the thawed earth began to bloom, Deadwood stirred again. Rumors spread through the town. Ben Morrison's men gone missing, a preacher's widow alive and under the protection of a ghost who'd once been called the Widowmaker. Elias didn't care about talk. He spent his days cutting new logs, fixing fences, teaching Miriam how to shoot straighter, how to ride stronger. And at night, they'd sit by the fire in quiet peace, the kind that had no need for words. One evening, she brought out her husband's Bible, edges charred from the fire. She set it on the table and looked at Elias. "You should read it," she said. "It's not just about God, it's about forgiveness." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I wouldn't know where to start." "Then start anywhere," she said. "It's what I did." He hesitated, then opened the book at random. His eyes fell on a verse about mercy, about lost men finding their way home. For a long moment he stared at it, then closed the book gently. "Maybe someday," he said. "Maybe today," she replied softly. That night, the wind outside was quiet, carrying only the sound of spring's first rain. Elias watched it fall, feeling something loosen inside him, something that had been frozen for years. He turned to her, his voice low. "You ever think about leaving? Going back to town?" "I thought about it," she said, "but then I remembered there's nothing left there for me." He nodded slowly. "There's not much here either." She smiled. "There's peace here, and you." Elias looked into her eyes, searching for doubt. There was none, only a quiet, steady truth. The man who'd once been called the Widowmaker looked away, the faintest of smiles touching his lips. "Guess that's enough reason to stay." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the land began to breathe again, washed clean by spring. And in that lonely mountain cabin, a man who'd spent his life running from salvation finally stopped.